In 1911, Roald Amundsen became the first person to reach the South Pole. From that moment, the race began to be the first to cross all of Antarctica. Ernest Shackleton made the first attempt in 1913, but failed. Richard Byrd was the first to fly over the continent in 1929, but an overland crossing had yet to be completed. Vivian Fuchs was a well-traveled British geologist with extensive experience in places like Greenland and East Africa. In 1949, he was conducting a geologic survey on an island off the coast of British Columbia when he was trapped in a blizzard. While waiting out the storm, he came up with the idea for an Antarctic crossing. Fuchs was not motivated by fame and glory like others before him, but by the scientific knowledge that could be gained by this expedition. He wanted to determine the thickness of the ice sheet, if the glaciers were receding, and if the Earth was warming or cooling. Hauling seismic sounding gear and other instruments would require the use of mechanized transport. His plan was to set up 2 bases, one on each side of the continent. The expedition would consist of tracked vehicles, dog teams, and aircraft. The primary vehicles were Tucker Snowcats, powered by 200 horsepower Chrysler V8 engines. The Snowcats were capable of a top speed of 8 miles an hour, with a fuel consumption of about 1 to 2 miles per gallon. They also used Bombardier Muskeg tractors and Studebaker weasels. The 8 vehicles with 12 sledges hauled over 5,000 gallons of gasoline, 1,000 pounds of tools and spares, 1,000 pounds of explosives and seismic instruments, 3,000 pounds of food, and 13,000 pounds of scientific equipment, cameras, and other gear. On October 8th, Fuchs left Shackleton Base, and the first attempt to cross Antarctica had begun. Fuchs drove the leading vehicle. Men on skis pushed ahead with long poles to probe for crevasses. But despite this precaution, vehicles got stuck on a regular basis, and a set recovery drill was soon adopted. If a vehicle got stuck crossing a crevasse, another vehicle would detach its sledge, find a safe way around, and then tow the vehicle out. Sometimes a vehicle would be damaged dropping into a crevasse. The steering and pontoons were especially vulnerable. In one instance, Fuchs looked back to see the following vehicle had vanished. It had fallen into a crevasse. Men descended to carve ledges to support aluminum bridging ladders. Once the tracks were supported, 2 Snowcats were used for recovery. With super low gearing and 200 horsepower on tap, the stuck Snowcat was quickly rescued. Despite the crevasses, problems with overheating, and ignition issues, Fuchs finally reached South Ice on December 21st. The 349 miles had taken 29 days to cover. He pushed on following the markers left by the reconnaissance team, and conducted his scientific work along the way. On December 31st, they reached a surface covered with sastrugi, hard ridges of snow shaped by the wind. This punishing terrain caused a weasel to break a track, and it was simply abandoned. Only about 18 miles were covered each day instead of the normal 25. On January 5th, enough fuel had been used that the Muskeg was no longer needed for hauling, and was also abandoned. On January 19th, Fuchs finally reached the South Pole, and began the last leg of his journey to McMurdo. He abandoned the last weasel, and now made good time, even covering 75 miles in one day. But this progress was short-lived. The snowcats were now developing problems with their tracks and steering components, and one of his geophysicists fell ill with carbon monoxide poisoning. The snowcat had developed an exhaust leak, and the cab windows had been left closed. Fuchs radioed for help. Oxygen and medical equipment was flown in by the U.S. Navy. He pushed forward and soon reached Depot 700 on February 7th, Midway Depot on the 11th, and Depot 480 on the 17th. Fuchs and his snowcats were unstoppable. He reached Plateau Depot on February 23rd, and Skelton Depot on the 28th. Finally, on March 2nd, 1958, Fuchs arrived at Scott Base, having completed the first overland trans-Antarctic crossing, 2,158 miles in 99 days. He was given a knighthood for his accomplishment, and with it, the great age of exploration had finally come to an end.